50 years ago, people were obsessed drinking Coke out of glass bottles, but now that's a luxury reserved for specialty restaurants and hotels. Society is supposed to improve with advancing technology, yet we somehow went from glass bottles to polluting, never recycled plastic bottles. Why? You've probably seen the video that showed the generational change Coca-Cola bottles underwent over time. Many people I know, including myself, couldn't believe how gorgeous Coca-Cola bottles and packaging used to be. Let's look at a bottle from 1899. Imagine ordering a Coke and drinking from that. This stylish glass packaging was present across many different industries, from the wine industry and even to milk industries. To this day you'll still see the glass bottles, but back in the day they would be available, and we'll discuss these later in the video. But how did glass bottles become the go-to for holding liquids? Let's dive in. Before glass bottles were normalized, wine and other drinks were stored in clay flasks called amphorae. In fact, ancient Mesopotamians and Egyptians even labeled the flasks with the names of the contents they held and other important information. Even though glass existed already, it was mainly used for decorations and ceilings and mosaics. Glass vessels were also used, but they were only reserved for the best of the best, truly luxurious items. This was until the Romans took over, and you know the rest of the story. Roads were built, some gods got new names, emperors got stabbed in the back, the usual. But the Romans did something that influenced us forever, something incredible. They didn't really take credit for this technique, but there was no argument that they truly perfected the process and made it more accessible. They revolutionized it, and they made, blowing open the glass market. And people immediately discovered that glass bottles were perfect for storing wine. One, they didn't affect the taste, and two, you could see how much was left in the bottle. At least the emperors could now measure their limits. The Roman glass blowing technique, too, had many limitations. However, it kept evolving until vessels could be produced in large volumes. Enter the Industrial Revolution. With machines and scale, the glasswork of the 1800s and 1900s was greatly advanced. Basically, glassware came in all different shapes. This was also the period when John Pemberton invented Coca-Cola. Initially, people drank it without any measurement or using any container available. I just can't imagine people rushing to a fountain and drinking this new, sweet, sugary drink filled with cocaine back in the 1800s. And some would even argue that Coca-Cola was the very first fast food, since it was available as a fountain drink on the go. You could just go and get it as a fountain drink without it actually being packaged. This obviously wasn't sustainable in the long term. The soda was getting popular thanks to its cocaine contents, and a new way of packaging was needed. Enter Joseph A. Bittenharn, the owner of a candy store in Vicksburg, Mississippi. He'd be the first man to bottle a Coke. He packaged it in a Hutchinson bottle, a well-known and reusable glass bottle at the time. This was Coke for the next 7 years. In 1906, they introduced an amber-colored glass bottle with a triangular logo. However, this packaging wasn't working for the very hard-working American and the blossoming Coca-Cola company that just wanted more money, due to one singular reason: competition. There was a lot of them. Other companies had sprung up. For example, Coke, K-O-K-E for example, I know they didn't even try, was diligently copying and competing with Coca-Cola for the new beverage market that was opening up. In fact, the identity heist Coke was trying to carry out was so glaring that Coca-Cola had to sue them. According to this document, defendants began to manufacture beverages similar in appearance and taste to that of the Coca-Cola company, selling them under the names Coke and Dope. At this point, the Coca-Cola company knew it had to create an uncontested brand identity worldwide. So in 1915, they decided to switch to a new, never-seen-before shape, the hobble skirt bottle that it's famous for. This iconic contoured bottle, produced by Root Glass Company of Terre Haute, Indiana, took out copycats like Coca-Cola, Yum Yum, and Coke out of the picture. Coca-Cola's soda crate was now packaged in a reusable bottle belonging to the company. At a point, they even introduced the six-pack to drive the notion that this drink could be enjoyed with the family. The bottle had truly revolutionized the market for Coke, and it was happily ever after. Since it was really working for them, they did everything possible to ensure the bottles were returned after consumption. They even implored consumers to return the bottles after use. But when have people ever obeyed instructions that do not directly benefit them? When the company saw that this wasn't working well, they devised a brilliant system. The problem was that they needed people to return the bottles, right? Then they thought, why not offer a 2-cent reward for every bottle returned? This was honestly genius. People started returning bottles in droves. In fact, new businesses developed as a result of this move from Coca-Cola. Bottling companies were everywhere, collecting bottles and making them ready for refilling as soon as possible. This deposit return system ensured about 96% of Coke glass bottles were reused. The Coca-Cola deposit return system was so good. Even now, companies in different countries employ the same strategy, but they use machines and other more automated systems. Back in the 1920s, this new system was working so well because everyone involved was getting something out of it. For the company itself, it removed the need to create new containers, it stopped littering, and the product remained untainted. Since the company was spending money on reusability and someone in the business didn't like that little payment system, so the company was considering ways to change its packaging later on. The material needed to be light, easily moldable, and provide easy access for all their distributors. All this while the company was trademarking the term Coke, C-O-K-E, and making decisions to improve the business. Then something horrible would happen. Can you guess? World War II broke out, and it was the end for a majority of businesses, but Coca-Cola was not one of those businesses. Sales of Coca-Cola in foreign countries to World War II troops helped in its popularity. You really have to understand that there were millions and millions of soldiers far from home, and this was some free propaganda for Coke. Robert Woodruff, former president of the company, said, "Every man in uniform can get a bottle of Coke for 5 cents wherever he is and whatever it cost the company." It was a huge gamble, but it honestly really paid off for them. Franklin Roosevelt, who was US president at the time, saw that having a Coke kind of boosted morals for the soldiers at the front lines, so he declared that Coca-Cola should get to all American soldiers, no matter their location. By assuming the position of a global symbol of American patriotism, it meant that foreigners associated the US with Coke products and Coca-Cola Company with the US, and they wanted to taste this drink. This all started what would be known as the Coca colonization, which is the company establishing bottling plants across the globe. The Coke bottle was everywhere, which also meant that a piece of America was everywhere. You must have probably heard the saying, "In war, there are no victors." This didn't apply to Coca-Cola. They were definitely winning. They even started another juicy, orangey beverage during World War II, which would be named Fanta. The company was winning, but glass bottles were losing in an invisible fight. Despite the economic roller coaster the world was in during the war, Coca-Cola kept the price of their beverage at 5 cents, a risky decision which meant something had to give for such an idea to work. And the quality of Coke itself can't be tampered with, and hence the glass bottle would pay the ultimate price. Already in 1941, PET, a form of plastic, had been invented by Winfield and Dixon. They worked on its evolution over the course of 10 years, and by the 1950s, though the war was over, Coca-Cola had gotten valuable insight on the difficulty and cost of continuing with solely a refillable system that had so many moving parts and so many funnels. Between the 1950s and the 1970s, the company torn down the refillable system it had in place in the US, adopting single-use systems instead. This system basically meant that containers could be simply disposed of after use. PET became the material of choice, of course, and Coca-Cola was swift with incorporating this new packaging system with many advertisements and propaganda. In a short period of time, plastic Coke bottles had taken over the US and slowly the world. The truth was, these plastic bottles were far lighter than glass bottles. They were extremely cheaper to make, they were faster to make, logistical accidents didn't mean loss of products, they were single use, the company didn't have to wait or pay consumers to return them, and finally, it cut out third parties like bottling companies from profiting off Coca-Cola's success. The result, however, litter everywhere. According to a report, Coca-Cola knew at the beginning of 1970 that switching to single-use containers would hurt Mother Earth, but they did it anyways. And of course, the plastic production of Coca-Cola has only been on the rise since then. With the company's expansion going into the deepest crevices of Earth, there is almost no place you wouldn't find Coke. And Coke itself now comes in many varieties, but just in bottles you'll find Coke Zero, Coke Diet, you'll see Fanta, and a whole bunch of other beverages that have the Coca-Cola stamp. I mean, they even make water. But what is the issue with plastic? Why do we hate it so much? The problem with plastic has been long and difficult because it's hard to decompose. I mean, it's just like that X that you can't get rid of. It just doesn't leave. It stays on Earth no matter what. PET, which is what Coca-Cola uses and many other companies do as well, is a resistant plastic that takes about 450 years to decompose since it requires UV light to break down a lot of it. When they finally break down into smaller particles, they become invisible, but the molecule doesn't leave the environment. These microplastics get into our food chain, water, and ecosystems, where it hurts plants and animals and humans. I mean, all of this makes our dear planet Earth a sacrificial lamb for Coca-Cola and big corporations. This is why it wasn't shocking when the company was declared the worst plastic polluter in the world, and yet they sponsor all these different environmental events, by the way. I instantly thought to myself when I saw that, yes, that sounds about right. For a long time, people have been pushing major companies like Coca-Cola and others, including governments, to take the problem of plastic solution more seriously. And a lot of plastic, including those with the recycling icon on it, cannot be recycled properly, and most of it ends up in dumps or the ocean. And before you ask why, specifically Coca-Cola, because it does seem like the focus is on them, and it is in this video, they had been asked for a long time to release figures for their plastic footprint and had always refused to disclose it. However, in 2017, perhaps with their backs against the wall, they finally decided to release the data. Coca-Cola pumps out more than 200,000 bottles a minute, an equivalent of 3 million tons of plastic packaging every single year. 3 million tons. To give you a clearer picture, this figure was converted into a 500 milliliter PET plastic bottle, which is about 108 billion bottles a year. If you screamed, it would be understandable. Of course, your first question is, why would any government allow this to happen? Well, they did slap the Coca-Cola company with bottle bills and bans on single-use containers, but you wouldn't believe what big corporations did. They of course fought against the effort to make them pay environmental impact bills and plastic packaging fine. Instead, Coca-Cola's brilliant idea was to put the debt for its pollution on everyone else. Whether you consume their product or not, when they started the disposable packaging initiative and the pollution started, they were putting the work of cleaning up on the consumer. Their argument was that they were not responsible if the container was empty. I think they saw how completely foolish they sounded and made a U-turn. They started their own organization, World Without Waste program, in the late 2010s, and it was a circular economy application that promised future green growth. But since then, Coca-Cola opened in 14 more countries before 2020, and its plastic items had increased by 18%. Clearly, instead of dealing with the source of the problem, which is the use of disposable bottles, Coca-Cola is trying to control the consequences of its pollution by sticking to its single-use ideology. Many voices have shouted solutions from the rooftops. The company could simply do more research and devise a way to quickly and easily reuse, recycle, or compost 100% of its plastic packaging. Or, you guessed it, they can stop plastic packaging completely and return it back to reusable packaging. You see, glass bottles didn't fail. Coca-Cola just became greedy. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you watching this video, and I hope to see you on the next one.